This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 73.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
Afternoon, Benny. How are you?
I'm doing well, Ramsey. How are you?
I'm doing good. So, it's Friday afternoon. How was your week?
It was good. It's been a really interesting week. Lots of different things come up. I'm just coming off. We just came off our sales kickoff the week prior, so got right back into it, and got right back in the swing of things. You might even say right back in the middle of the fire.
That's only YouTube viewers will see the meaning of that pun, and they will shake their heads just like I did.
How was your week?
It was busy. Like there's a lot of things to do. Our sales kickoff is not in January. It's more like May and April, and not all SEs go. So I don't know if I'm going this year. But lucky for you, your sales kickoff is in Ottawa. A lot of people don't like going on sales kickoffs because it's time away from the field. And depending on who's doing it, it's a lot of marketing and drinking beer more than anything else. So, but good. So did you learn anything during the sales kickoff?
Learned a few things. It was, I guess, the corporate overview part. It was kind of cool. We had a whole day dedicated mostly to having the different leaders at the organization come in and speak a little bit about their purviews and about some of the strategies moving into 2020 and into the future. So that was really educational. The second day of the sales kickoff, and this may also mirror a lot of SC experiences. Unfortunately, I got pulled into a number of demos. There were a number of things I had to do for work during that second day. And the second day there were a lot of workshops oriented towards account managers and business development. Not all of it was as applicable, I suppose, to me. But in the end, I mean, there's no better workshop than an actual demo to practice my skills. So that's what I was able to do with that.
What kind of workshops for account managers are we talking about?
So anything from, learning more about the industry, learning more about how to sell to the specific pains that customers have, hunting for accounts, negotiation training as well, a little light negotiation training, objection handling, things like that within the context of what we do. And there's probably going to be a lot of overlap, I'm sure, among different organizations and what those look like.
So my advice to SEs who don't attend these trainings, if you can, try to attend them, because they are, based on what you said, a lot of them are stuff that we do on a daily basis anyways.
This is true.
Even negotiation, if we don't show the value of the product, it makes it harder for the account manager to negotiate for the price. That being said, you've been talking about demos a lot. So the topic of today's discussion, so it's a duo show, I guess. We don't have any guests. It's just you and I. And the topic is piggybacking off of a YouTube video I did with Brian Geary, who's the managing partner of Sales NV. And it's about like the top 10 things not to say during a demo, what you can say instead. So, you ready?
I am. Yeah, I'm looking forward to. I'm writing notes.
What's one thing you say a lot of? This is not number one, but I'm going to go straight to that. What's one thing you say a lot of after someone asks you a question?
I say this every time. What a great question.
There you go. Don't say that. Number one. Don't say that unless it's absolutely something that's flooring you. No, that's my opinion, obviously. Feel free to say it if you think you're right. I'm pretty sure you're not. But generally speaking, don't say great question after every question. Reserve it to the really, really great questions. And you have an objection. Let me handle your objection. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I suppose, maybe I'm an optimist at heart in many respects. Maybe I'm too enthusiastic about things. But sometimes a lot of the questions that are asked can seem like great questions depending on the context that the person is coming from. So if they're maybe not as experienced, then maybe they ask a very simple question, but still is a very critical question with respect to the overall process. I still feel like I want to acknowledge that it's a great question, all the way to somebody very technical asking a very technical question that equally within its own context can be a great question. What are your thoughts about that, or how do you kind of prioritize which questions are really good ones, which ones are not?
I don't prioritize. I answer all questions. I don't say great question or good question, especially not after every single question that they ask, because I think I made that comment to you when I was doing the interview with you, or at some point, I can't remember. You said, great question. I'm like, yeah, all my questions are great. Right? Like that's the thought that comes in my head. I don't know about customers, but yeah, I know my questions. I wouldn't have asked my question if I didn't think it was great or good or whatever it is. Just like answer my question, answer the question. If there's some question that's stumping you, it's like, oh, that's something I haven't thought of before. Or
Right.
like if there's a question that leads me into a next point, I would say something like, I'm so happy you asked that question, because that's leading me right to the next point, versus like, great question. Yeah, I know it's a great question. Thank you for the acknowledgement. If someone's cocky enough, like some customers are cocky, so there's somebody in everybody that's cocky. Like yeah, I know my questions are great, right? I don't need your validation for that. So that is number one.
What are your thoughts very quickly also on this idea of maybe repeating a question back sometimes? So if they ask a question, they say, how do you do this? And then you might say, so how do we do that? Then go into it. Is that another way perhaps to acknowledge it?
Why do you want, the way I like to acknowledge, if they ask me a question that I don't 100% understand, I try to rephrase it in a way that I think the question is, just to make sure that they know that I heard them, I understood what they're trying to say, and this is what I'm going to try to answer. Versus repeating exactly the same sentence that they said. It feels more like you're just buying time.
Right. Yes.
At least that's for me.
Nope, you're right. I was going to say a lot of these strategies are really good for buying time. So
yeah,
yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So if you need to buy time, you can buy time. You can just like, all right, just give me a second. I need to pull something up or whatever it is. I don't try to hide that if I'm buying time. Like, here, let me think about that for a second. If we do this, and I talk it out loud with them.
Okay.
Like, I don't know all the answers. That's just me. Number two, those. I need to. I don't know if we're editing that one out. So, all right. Number two is, as I said. I had a colleague who used to get pissed off at customers and would say that, and I would start cringing. And he was a specialist, so he didn't own the customer. I owned the customer, and he would come in and he would say stuff like, as I said, I'm like, why are you pissing off my customer, man? Just answer the question. It's not his job to understand what you're saying, it's your job to make him understand.
It's very true. I guess in general, leaving SaaS at the door, I guess no pun intended for those of you working in software sales, but yeah, leaving SaaS at the door and not, saying things like, as I said, or even this may be on the list, or obviously even is another really big word, perhaps not to use as much, because the last thing you want to do, I imagine, is make your prospect or make your client on the other side sound like they don't get something that they should be getting, and you just don't want them to sound dumb.
Yeah, obviously to who? Not to the customer.
Right, exactly.
And it took me a while to get that leave that SaaS thing. Why is he leaving SaaS, SaaS out? All right.
Thank you.
Good one. What is he talking about? Pun intended. All right, number three. Ready? I don't know what that button does or that field does. And that happened to me where we have complex GUIs that we show with a lot of fields. And I don't know exactly what every field does. So when I'm preparing the demo, I scripted I'm going to talk about this, and hit next, talk about that. And then while I'm doing this, a guy asked me, what's that button? That one thing that had nothing to do with anything I was demoing. I don't know what that button does. So even if you don't want to show it in a demo, know exactly what's on the screen and at least be able to answer it briefly. Just a brief description of what it does. Not necessarily go into details or deviate from your plan, but.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. So this whole idea too, if you think about things from the prospect perspective, and this has taken me quite some time to understand, they're coming from a place where they don't know anything that you're showing them in many respects. And so you really are the expert showing them what it is that they want to see, whatever solution it may be. And so, I guess there's almost two things taking place here. One is this idea that you're almost losing credibility in the eyes of the prospect if all of a sudden you start if all of a sudden you start saying, hey, I don't actually know how to respond to this question, or I don't really know what this button actually does. But then two, from the prospect perspective, they don't actually know much about it. So with that very simple high-level response, that's going to be more than enough to satisfy what they're looking for. So I think that's wonderful advice.
Yeah, and on the screen, they don't know what's important and what's not. They're seeing everything. You might be guiding them, but they're going to see all the extra fluff that they may never use. And we need to let them know that this is that. You're never going to use it.
Exactly.
All right, number 4. 4 for our fellows in Quebec. I don't want to get into too much details on this.
Oh, interesting. In what context?
Well, if they ask you a question, or like if there's a topic that you bring up and you don't want to, like, you just want to talk about it briefly, don't say I don't want to get into too much details about this. Just talk about it briefly. Or if they ask you a question, don't say I don't want to get into too much details. Talk about it briefly and say if this is something you guys want more information about, we can talk about it later or take it offline or whatever it is. Just saying I don't want to get into too much information, like, I don't know. It's just, for me, it feels weird. Why? Who made you the boss of not getting into too much details here?
Fair. What about this, though, as a counterpoint to that? So I think you're right, because the last thing you want to do perhaps is make it seem as if you're avoiding something on purpose. But what about this idea of, you're running short on time, and you put it into context where they want to see something that you could potentially speak at length about, but time is coming up to the end of the hour. Maybe they've already established the fact that that they perhaps have a hard stop, maybe at the end of the hour or at the end of the time or the scheduled time. Is it okay to perhaps say that I don't really, so maybe give that brief introduction as you described, but I don't want to go into too much detail with respect to this because we can talk about this for maybe another 10, 20, 30 minutes. Maybe it's best to schedule another time. If you kind of wrap it up, you think, within context, does that make it any more appropriate?
Well, generally speaking, so Brian talked about this in the YouTube video, which we'll link in the show notes, wetheses.com/show93. When you're coming up with the agenda and you're presenting the agenda, you're getting agreement that this is what you're going to talk about. If you're going to talk about something else, then if they want something else, then you might want to add to the agenda. And he has the concept of the accordion demo. So he builds in time into each of his demos that if there's a part they don't care as much about, he can shrink it and increase another part. So at the start, if you're understanding that this is the part that they want more details on, then I'm going to stretch this part and shrink another part. If they want everything, then maybe you should have scheduled more time for the demo. Right?
This is entirely fair. I agree with that. Maybe the one little caveat I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm in a position, for example, and perhaps other SCs would be in a similar position where the person scheduling the call itself is not the SC, or it's the account manager. And so they schedule time. Maybe they don't qualify the demo as well as they should, or even in the case that they do, other topics come up in the conversation where even given the accordion, there perhaps things still can go a little bit over. I've personally been in a couple situations where discussions have been tabled for future demos because of the types of questions that were asked that were maybe beyond the scope of the original scope of the conversation or beyond the scope of the original agenda. However, as much as you can minimize it, I totally agree. It's not the best thing to say, but I guess I could see how it could potentially work at times. But I think in general, I think you're right.
Yeah, like in the perfect world, I would want the SE to actually share the agenda with the customers ahead of time, like share with the account manager so he can share it with the agenda so you can get their blessings. Right.
True.
It doesn't always work. Like sometimes you have to improvise. The whole point is to shorten the sales cycle. The more demos you schedule, the longer the sales cycle. So it's in everyone's benefit to squeeze it as much as possible. And if there's something that they want to get into details and try to get that information ahead of time. If not, then try to get it at the start of the demo so that you can maybe modify stuff. You don't, if you're unprepared, you're unprepared. Like, it's not your fault. It's just the way it is right now, and you might have to schedule something else later, or like send answers or send a video afterwards about like how that other part works versus like scheduling another demo or just prolonging it. Basically, you'll figure that out with experience. Right?
Cool. Yeah.
So we were at number 4. Number 5, the competitor doesn't do this.
Right.
Yeah, like I've seen so many demos where like someone trashes the competitor, right? And especially in the world of SaaS, the competitor didn't do it last week. Maybe he does it this week.
Exactly.
Right. And maybe my information is incorrect to begin with. Right. So just try to highlight what you think you do better than the competition, and focus on that. Try to get the customer. There's the concept of the booby trap. Give the customer a booby trap that he can ask your competitor. Mm-hmm. Right. And if they don't have it, they'll fall into the booby trap. If they do have it, you didn't do anything wrong.
Agreed.
What do you think of that?
I would say that in many industries, at least in the ones I are, there's a large, or rather there's an increasing number of smaller organizations that may not do everything or may not compete to your entire portfolio of offerings, but they may start to chip away at little things that you do. Maybe 10% of your offering, you have one company that's dedicated towards it. So while in many cases, maybe even there is perhaps a situation where you don't have a direct competitor competing against every single thing that you do, but I can almost guarantee that you have competitors chipping away at every little thing that you do. And so it's a very dangerous thing to say my competition doesn't do this, because in reality, more than likely, in fact, some of your competition is.
Yeah. And well, like in my world, in networking world, like if you think about Cisco, Nokia, Juniper, they all pretty much do somewhat similar things. They might do them differently, but it's somewhat similar. So saying that the competitor doesn't do this, they don't do it today. Yes, maybe if your competitive information is up to date, but they can do it tomorrow. And also, you may have someone in the audience who's a supporter of the competitor, and they may know right then and there that they can do it, or maybe they did the demo before you came and you didn't know it, and they showed them that.
Right.
Like you're stepping on a landmine doing that.
Mm-hmm. I guess in general, don't be very don't be very adversarial in many respects. Like obviously stand behind your solution, be confident about what you're presenting, present it as the best there is, but never at the expense of other competitors is probably a fair rule.
Yeah. So for me, generally, I don't bring up the competitors. I don't talk about the competitors. I've heard of situations, I haven't witnessed it, but I've heard of situations where the customer was not aware of a competitor. Someone said the competitor doesn't do it, and like, oh, who's your competitor? And they ended up buying from the competitor.
Amazing.
Right? Like they shot themselves in the foot. So yeah. Do you say this? So this is number, where are we? 7. This is going to be
6 or 7. Yeah.
This is going to be a quick episode. Cool. Number 7. This feature is amazing. Or this feature is so cool.
I say that sometimes, actually. I'm not gonna lie. I get pretty enthused with my own demos sometimes, and I'll start to explain but not uninitiated. So if I find that they're extremely excited about specific things I'm showing. So say for example, I show them something that they expressed was a very strong pain point, and they're like, "Oh my goodness, wow, that's going to save me so much time. This is so cool." So if they kind of initiate it, then typically there's something else that I show, where I like to think that my demos are kind of a mountain where I think we start off pretty high up with some pretty cool things, but then I start to show progressively more interesting things. Not to say that I don't address customer pain points right away, but all part of the overall story. And they'll kind of pile on and be like, "Oh, if you thought that was cool, check out this," and then go on from there.
That's very different, because they said it was cool. That's a different story. But True. For me to show up and say like, we did this feature, I'm gonna now show you something really cool. And True. Like, cool for who? Right? In the end, you're not selling the feature. You're selling the solution. You're like, if the feature is cool and it solves a problem, then maybe. But if the feature is just cool, then what's the purpose? Right? So, but if you can get them to say that it's cool, that means you did your job, which is what you're looking for.
It's a good point. Yeah. And the last thing you want to do is build yourself up to be super, super like almighty, and then I don't know, entirely just get deflated.
Yep. And number 8, which is kind of similar to number 7. Oh, it's easy.
I'm guilty of that.
We're all guilty of that. I've said it. I've seen people say it. I've seen experienced people say it. We're all guilty of it. It's just, I've noticed that, like, I've seen my customers say it, my colleagues say it, and then I watch the customer as my colleague is showing them how to do it. For him, it's easy. Yes, he's doing it every day. Click, 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 click. We're done, right? The customer's looking like, how did you do? Wait, where did you click? Could you go back? Like, it's not easy. It might get easier at some point, but today it's not easy.
Fair enough. I would say so. That's actually an interesting point when you kind of describe clicking around, because that's entirely fair. I mean, there's certain things that took me maybe 10 minutes when I started that I could probably do with my eyes closed, with my left hand. I'm right-handed. In less than a minute or so, with respect to the interface I work with. However, what if there's a situation where, given the context where perhaps there's something that would take a prospect, let's say hours, and they know the industry that they're in very well, they know why they're speaking to you and why you may provide value to them. And let's say there's like a 1 or a 2-click solution that more or less automates something that they did in a very manual way in the past. Do you think that with that very clear context down with respect to them understanding what they're doing now and how your solution can help them, do you think something like that may warrant you saying, hey, look how easy it is compared to what you normally have to do?
I would say, like, look, we have this 1-click solution. Let me show you. Click. And hopefully they'll say, oh, look, it's so easy.
Fair
like
enough.
I try not to like give adjectives to my features or demos. I try to show my demo in the easiest way possible in hopes that they see how easy it is.
Right?
I
like that, actually.
Because if they can build the vision in their minds of how easy it is, it's better than you forcing it down their throat. Because like I have a combative nature. So if someone tells me it's easy, I'm gonna tell them, screw you, it's not. Right? No matter how easy it is. Like, you don't tell me it's easy, I tell you it's easy. And so I'm sure other customers are the same way. Like, someone shows me a Maserati, like trying to sell me a Maserati, like, this is the nicest car you'll ever see. Like, I've seen nicer. Right?
No, you're actually 100% right. You're absolutely right. But I like, that's great advice. Let them tell you how easy it is. Don't tell them.
Yeah.
Right.
Another thing is, I don't know if you can see this.
That's funny. Yeah.
Like, over a demo, it's like, I don't know if you can see this, but this is what I'm doing. Like,
right.
No.
It's kind of a silly thing.
Yeah. It's like, make sure they're seeing it. Like, they need to see it. So, yeah.
Exactly. I would say too, for a lot of new SEs or just people that are new on the phones in general, it could sometimes be sometimes those logistical questions can be a little bit awkward. Logistics with respect to, can you hear me? Can you see my screen right now? Is this okay? Would you like me to zoom in? You may think that it may disrupt the flow, but in reality, such a small investment or such a simple question can really boost your game quite a bit, where all of a sudden maybe a very strenuous experience from the prospect side where maybe they can't fully see everything on the screen. Maybe they don't want to be rude and ask questions or interrupt you. Now you're providing them the opportunity to get a much more comfortable experience in their demonstration. And it's always good to know you're on the same page from the get-go.
Yeah. And like John Kerr, no, sorry, not John Kerr, Peter Cohen. Okay. He has this like thing where he shows, do you see my top left corner? Do you see my mouse on the top left corner? Do you see my mouse on the right bottom corner, or the opposite way? I've seen people say, do you see my screen? We're like, yeah, sure, we see your screen. And then he starts presenting, but he's showing us the wrong screen.
Right. Yeah.
How do we know we're seeing his right screen? Like, do you see this presentation?
Exactly.
Also, I have a 4K screen. And if I'm presenting something and I say, do you see my screen? They may never say like, yeah, but it's too small.
Exactly.
Right? And, you go through that.
Yep.
But number 10, that's a bonus one. That's one that came from my son. Don't hurt someone. Biting. Don't rip people's shirts. That's my son's advice to everybody.
Don't rip people's shirts, or don't bite.
Yeah. He's 4 years old. He's at school, so he's like, so what shouldn't we say in that one? Like, he said, don't hurt someone, no biting, because his brother bites.
Fair, yeah.
And don't rip people's shirts. So
honestly, that's actually wise, though.
Yeah.
Even within the context of demos as well.
Yeah, I know. He's not here. He's not listening to you.
Fair enough. Have you ever been in a situation where you had perhaps a tougher prospect, someone that's a little bit more, not even aggressive, but maybe not somebody as they're not drinking the Kool-Aid as much as you may expect them to?
I've had. Yeah. See, don't do this. Don't interrupt the person asking the question. But I did, so I'm going to continue.
It's okay.
I've had combative customers. I've had customers call my product crap, it doesn't matter which company I'm in. I worked at Alcatel-Lucent, I worked at Spirent, I worked at Ixia. My product has been called crap when I worked in all three companies. It doesn't matter. People might not like your product, and I start sweating. I tense up, and then I crack a joke, and everything works out in the end. Or I just listen to it, let them go ahead and bash me.
And the nice thing about that too is that sometimes when you have very emotional prospects or customers like that, they can sometimes reveal very interesting nuggets that actually could turn the relationship around entirely. Like, say for example, if they're really pissed off about a specific pain that could have been brought on by your organization, or perhaps maybe they're even confusing your organization for another organization or a competitor. It's really interesting to see what types of nuggets come out of that passion, and staying level-headed and ensuring that you never, demonize the prospect is really important, because you never know what may happen in the future. Maybe right now they don't recognize the value you provide to them, but you never know. Maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, turns out their pains are that much bigger now because they've avoided you for so long, and they actually come running back, willing to take whatever price you throw at them, because again, you've maintained a positive relationship, or at least you never burnt that bridge.
It doesn't have to be like it can be combative. Like you can be challenging or whatever it is. In the end, if they need your product, they'll come back.
Exactly.
So I'm gonna go back. I do have my son has jiu-jitsu today. It's his second session, and I have to get there on time. So I'm gonna repeat what I said. The top 10 list. Don't say great question, Benny. As I said, I don't know what this button does. I don't want to get into too much details. The competitor doesn't do this. This feature is amazing. It's easy. I don't know if you can see this, and don't hurt or bite or rip people's shirts.
Oh, very good advice. I know that I'm going to need to take some of those off my demo script. And I would say that if anybody else is saying these things, I mean, just work on it. You don't have to worry about kiboshing everything. Just work on it and try to minimize your usage of all these terms and all these bad habits.
Yeah. So if you want more tips like this, well, keep listening to the podcast. If you're trying to break into sales engineering, we do have the course going, and people registering for the Road to Sales Engineering. So sign up for that. It's wetheSalesEngineers.com/courses. And what else? Do you have something to say, Benny, before we close? Quickly?
I don't think so. Thank you all so much for listening. And any feedback you have with respect to any of this, if you hear things that you know or that make you cringe on demos, we'll start up a forum post about this. So post in the demo or post in the forum those terrible things that you've heard before, and let's all learn from each other and maybe laugh at each other's mistakes and ultimately become better sales engineers all around.
Perfect. With that, this is Ramsey and Benny signing off.